Hello and welcome to the Band of One podcast. I am Riley Wilson, and this podcast is designed for anybody that wants to start, develop, or grow and master a solo or small group performing career. Not just a solo musician, it can be a duo or trio, heck, even a DJ. I've got over 50 years of live performance experience, which include not only the things I've learned over these years, but also from other hardworking pros in their neck of the woods. The idea here is to make this actionable, fun, and give you something you can implement right now to help your solo or small group take off. If you like what we do, like, subscribe, share, and consider becoming a sponsor. Let's get busy. Today I have on the Skype call one of the people that I've tried keeping up with for a long time, the one and only Mr. Edmond Baker Jr. Edmond, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Glad to be on the podcast.
You know, we have both been on Gig Masters, the Bash, for over a decade, and I always would follow you that you were always one of the highest rated solo performers for years and years in a row. And first of all, that's pretty terrific in and of itself. But also, I'm looking forward to just kind of finding out your backstory and how all of this came to be, because anybody that gets what they do, and by the way, Edmond is the #1 sax player on Gig Masters the Bash in the United States. So that's a tremendous accomplishment, my friend. Well deserved.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, let's begin at the beginning. First of all, where are you? I know you're based out of the Houston area, but are you from Houston or where exactly?
Well, I actually live in a small town called Clute, Texas. But I was born and raised in Brazoria, Texas. And
Brazoria.
Another small town, really small town. I guess Brazoria, maybe 2,800 population, in Clute now, where I live, is about 11,000.
But you're in the Houston general area, or not far from Houston, so you could play Houston whenever you wanted, pretty much, right?
Yes, sir. Because I tell everybody, whenever they ask where I'm from, I always just say the Houston area, because nobody ever hardly heard of where I'm from, so I just say the Houston area.
Well, I've heard of Brazoria before because my wife and I met in Houston many, many years ago, and I had opportunities to play several times down in Southeast Texas. So that's always a favorite spot. How did you get into saxophone? What was the clarion call that made you kind of say, "Man, I want to do that"?
I think that was 1982. I think it was 82 or 80, whatever it was. I was like 9 years old. I know that, and I was in the audience of another saxophonist. And he was a gospel saxophonist. His name is Bernard Johnson. We were at a concert that he did, and he's from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and he's my actual mentor now. Long story short, back then I was like 9 years old. I was sitting out in the audience, and he did his concert, and I was just really mesmerized. I was just like, wow, and I was like, man, when I grow up, I want to do that, And when I got in the 11th, I got in the 6th grade. I was 11 years old, and started in band. And they asked me what I wanted to play. I said I wanted to play the saxophone, and I picked it up and never put it down.
Wow. Now, when you started off as a 6th grader, by the way, would have this been like junior high school or middle school, or how was that?
Yes, sir. It was intermediate school.
Okay.
It was right before junior high. It was middle school.
Okay. And what saxophone did they start you on? By the way, were you physically a big guy at this time? Were you a Chinese fellow, or how did that?
Actually, I didn't start growing until high school, so I was pretty small in the 6th grade, and I started playing alto that year. But all they pretty much did was taught us how to put it together, and maybe put the mouthpiece and the neck together. But we didn't really do much playing in the 6th grade, just learning the fundamentals. But then once I got in junior high in the 7th grade, and I just started figuring that out, the only thing available was the baritone sax, and so they put me on the baritone sax in the 7th grade.
For those non-horn players in the audience, A baritone sax is about twice as big as an alto, is it not?
Yeah, or more. It's
Yeah.
bigger than that.
It's interesting. I actually had a short stint with an alto saxophone in fourth grade in Kentucky, and I lasted about 2 months. In fact, I thought I was a legend in my own mind. No one else's. I wanted to take it to church one Sunday and play it for Sunday school. My mom said, absolutely not, because she wasn't ready for our family to be kicked out of that church at the time. And it's hilarious because speaking about being small, I'm 6'2" and over 200 pounds, but at the time I was a little tiny spindly kid. I had arms about as big as my index finger, and I actually quit playing the sax for two reasons. Number one, I didn't like to read music. I didn't want to do that because I thought I was already a legend in my own mind. But the other one was the alto sax case was too big for me to walk to school with because we had about a 12 or 13-minute walk and it pulled on my arm, so I quit. Isn't that lame? But going to baritone, man, that's not only is that a huge physical leap for anybody, you have to have a lot of oxygen to do that. Do you not, Edmond?
Yes, sir. And like, because it's the soprano, the alto, the tenor, and the bari, and then they got the big, like the bass one. But the tenor is a lot bigger than the alto, and then the bari is a lot bigger than that. And so, because I sat down when I played it, I started developing, for us musicians, the embouchure.
Yes.
I started developing my embouchure and my breathing techniques, and it was like to be able to get a good note out of there. You really had to develop some strong lungs and oxygen, and techniques, as far as gripping the mouthpiece. And it was a lot bigger. Everything was just a lot bigger than that alto. But I learned from that bari, not knowing that it would make it a lot easier for me to learn the alto once I went back to the alto.
One of the things that I always recommend anybody that's a musician do is read the Charlie Parker biography, Bird Lives. Charlie Parker, of course, was arguably the greatest alto saxophonist ever and was a huge figure in the bebop movement back in the 1940s and 50s. And Charlie Parker, one of the things about his sound is that he used a really big, heavy, stiff reed. And for those of us that have not played the saxophone, that's a hard thing to do, is it not? To play a heavy reed?
It sure is.
And if you couple that with a much larger mouthpiece on a baritone horn, I'm sure that kind of put your embouchure, as we call it, through a lot of changes. Am I right?
Yeah, like playing with a big stick, that reed.
That's equivalent for a football analogy. That's like a running back or wide receiver becoming a tackle. It's a very grueling job, and there's no way, like Dick Vermeil, the old football coach, used to say, there's no way of easing into a street fight. There's no easy way to make a great sound on a baritone horn. Was that your experience?
It was.
But here's the thing: did you stay on the bari for a while, or did you change to another horn later on, or how did that work?
Well, actually, I like, according to my band instructor, I had picked it up really quickly, and like all of my scales and everything. It's like he said I was the first person he had ever given 100 to on the scales with the bari.
Wow.
And I'm like,
Wow.
what? And I was in the 7th grade, so I didn't know what I was accomplishing at that time. I was just happy, that he gave me a compliment, but whenever I did my scales and I learned them so quickly and was able to get my wind and everything, because when you're playing those scales, it's like I was doing them pretty fast, and so whenever I would do my scales and have that wind coming out of that sack, that bari so quickly, and was able to get my notes, he was like, he was impressive. But like I said, I didn't know I was doing nothing special.
Well, here's a quick question that I have to ask you. Mentioned going to a gospel concert at 9 years of age, and that's something that's fairly prevalent for those of us that were growing up in the South. Were either of your parents or other family members musical?
My mom, she was a pianist and a gospel singer songwriter. So she was, matter of fact, the first time I went into the studio was during one of her recordings, like back in '87.
Wow. So, in other words, you kind of grew up with a musical family or at least a musical environment, right?
I did. I did.
And I think it's interesting because a lot of other folks that I profiled, I've talked with folks. Mike Swinarski, one of my guitar students, was actually playing piano when he was 5 years old, and I had a buddy named Yancey Stevens who's on my first interview podcast, probably podcast 4 and 5, I think, and he was actually gigging with the high school marching band when he was 11 because he could do it. And it's interesting because all of you guys and girls that I'm profiling on here, most of you have had success at an early age. And I think it's probably because, beginning on a new instrument when you're 10, 11, 12 years of age, you don't know what's difficult or not. You just get out there and get after it.
Yeah.
One of the things I also have to ask you about, because alto saxophone is either written in alto clef or C clef, whereas baritone sax is written in E flat or more commonly bass clef, right? So you were able to not only learn to play the scales, sound good on it, but you're reading in a different clef than you did the previous year, all that in 1 year?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I didn't
Wow.
know about all of that. I just was doing it. I didn't know about the different clefs and the different. I just picked it up and started doing whatever I had to do.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible.
You reminded me of something too, because I don't really talk about it because everybody knows me from the saxophone now. But my dad, he was the pastor of our church because I grew up a PK, preacher's kid, and I started playing the sax. I mean, I started playing the drums first. I was like in kindergarten when I started playing the drums. Yeah,
Okay.
I was like 5 years old playing the drums.
One of the great things about being in a church like that, and I actually got to go back and visit a Baptist church that my family and I attended when I was in junior high school in Michigan. They didn't have all of that then, but they have, like the band stuff and all this drums and all that stuff. If you're 5 or 6 years old and that's something that interests you, if you got an opportunity, you're going to go up there and start hitting the sticks, aren't you?
Yeah. Exactly.
So here's a question. And we haven't even addressed this. Are there other instruments that you do besides a little bit of drums and saxophone?
Yes, because like the saxophone was when I was 11, but that was the one I was really intrigued about. The drums was just something I picked up because growing up in church with the music and stuff, and my mom was the pianist, and she was the choir director, the praise and worship leader, the congregational song leader, whatever, and so I just grew up in that, and I didn't even know I knew how to play the drums. It just I said I wanted to play them, and my parents bought me a drum set, and I just went to town on them, and then started playing in church, and developed over the years, But I could play a little bit with the keyboard, piano. I can mess around. But my mom, she taught lessons, but I never was one of her students. I never learned how to play really, like formally. But then the bass guitar, I picked that up about 15. When I was about 15, started playing the bass.
Wow. Did you find, because you've grown up in such a musical environment and also that you were able to go from one instrument to another, did you find that they kind of fed off one another, and learning this on this instrument helps you to learn that on that one?
Exactly. Because and like, we're talking about it, it makes me have to think, but it's like back then I just did it. I just I didn't think about anything technical or this or that. I just, it was music, and I love music. And when I did my first recording, it was a cassette tape, and it was old time gospel favorites, and had all the traditional gospel hymnals and stuff on there. But I was doing it with the sax. It was instrumental, and my mom, she was the keyboard player on that. I did the sax, the bass guitar, and the drums on the track.
By the way, let me very, very quick thing. Can we share with folks that are listening and watching what's your web page name?
Oh, it's ebsax.com. www.
ebsax.com. I'll have that not only on the transcript for those of you listening, but we'll also have it on the video on the video podcast. That's great. We'll get back to that in a moment. So you played 2 years of saxophone at school. Did you continue that through the rest of your years, or how did all that work?
Well, like the only formal training I had was 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and after junior high, I didn't play anymore in band or anything. I just kept playing on my own, just doing it, in church and stuff.
Well, let me ask you a question. You had a teacher that in 8th grade was very supportive of you, and yet you're not continuing to do it past what, 8th grade, I guess? Did you
Yeah.
just get bored with what they were doing at school, or did you get reprimanded for not, playing the notes they wanted to play, or how did that go?
Yeah, well, like in the 8th grade, well, I'm gonna go back to the 6th grade. In the 6th grade, when I said I wanted to play initially, that particular band director kind of tried to discourage me, and I don't know if it was because they didn't have enough, horns to go around or what, but he was telling me my fingers were too short and my hands were too small because I was tiny. Like I said, I was tiny in the beginning. I didn't start growing until maybe 10th grade or whatever, but he was telling me my hands were too short, my fingers were too short, and but I had my mind made up. It was no talking me out of playing the saxophone, and so that was one thing I wanted to mention because I remember I was like adamant about playing the sax. I wasn't gonna let him talk me out of playing it, but then in the 8th grade, fast forward after the Barry, then I went back to the alto in the 8th grade, and once I started playing the alto again. I mean, that was my baby. It was like I just knew it. The alto was my favorite because I had even dabbled with the tenor a little bit during that time too. But I started playing the alto. We went to regionals and we were winning all kind of contests and competitions, and I had solo parts and stuff, and I was just hearing so much more. Whenever I would go to, whenever we would have rehearsals and stuff. I would start improvising and ad-libbing and just, and it was like stuff that wasn't on the sheet, and my band instructor would get on me, start, telling me, stick with the sheet, and then when I would go in the band rooms and practice, when we had our own individual practicing time, I would go in the band rooms and I'll just, it's like when I'm playing that music, I would hear so much more, and I'll just start jamming out, just making up stuff, and he would come knock on the door and Edmond, that's not on that sheet. I know that's not on that paper. and so it was like, no, man, I can't do this because I was just hearing so much more, and I was feeling like I was just so limited. And then playing in church, it was like I was able to just be free whenever I would play solos and stuff in church. So it would be like I would go to church, play in church, and everybody would just be, just all into it and real supportive. And I'm just, like playing Amazing Grace or When the Saints Go Marching In or something, whatever I was playing. Everybody was just, just all into it. And I was able to ad-lib and improvise and just play what I heard, But then when I go back to school and sit in band class, it did start getting just boring and monotonous, and so after 8th grade, I say, I'm not going to continue in band, but I still kept playing though.
You know what's really interesting about all of this? First of all, for those folks that have never had a chance to go to a gospel church, it is immersive. It can get loud. It's definitely filled with the Holy Ghost.
Yeah.
And it's very moving. I worked with a keyboard player for a brief time back in the 70s who'd worked with gospel titan Shirley Caesar. And he played Hammond B3 organ, and it was like watching a hungry man devour a steak because he could play two things with his hands. He would walk bass lines with his feet, and it was something to behold.
Yeah.
And people would just come around this guy in this music store in Durham, North Carolina, and just go, oh, because they hadn't experienced anything like that before. So I'm sure the fact that you were doing what you love in an environment with your folks that's supportive and everybody's digging what you're doing, I could see why even going to regionals, and by the way, what that means in the state of Texas, our band competitions are every bit as fierce as our football competitions.
Yeah.
So I can see why that grew wearying on you. So At what point did you decide, you know what, I want to go out and play like gigs or solo gigs? How did any of that ever happen?
It was just like always a dream. My mentor, like I thought I was just gonna be going from church to church to church, traveling all over, evangelizing and just doing it like that because that's what he did. He just played in, a lot of different churches and he traveled all over playing in churches and stuff. So I thought that's what I was going to be doing at first, especially being a pastor's son and growing up in church and all of that. And that's the only thing I knew was gospel songs, and so I thought that's what I was going to be doing. But I mean, we plan our ways, but God guides our steps, and I started playing for like weddings here and there, and I would play, for different events. People would ask me to play for little parties and stuff, but all I knew was gospel. And so initially that's all I did. I just played instrumentals, gospel instrumentals, and I would play songs, that still, were appropriate for the environment. It wouldn't always be Amazing Grace or nothing, but it was always something gospel because that's all I knew. And
Sure.
when I started doing it for a living, though, it was in '02, January of '02, and I had been playing for 20 years before I started doing it as a career. I guess I was just always wanting more. It was like I was never content, like working jobs and stuff. When I was working, because I worked like a lot of jobs, but I was never satisfied because I always knew my music was what I wanted to do. And so everything I did, I just saw it as a stepping stone, to get to where I wanted to be. And I was always recording and stuff here and there throughout the years. And so, like, whether I was gonna sign a record deal or something with a company, or whether I was gonna do it as an independent, I didn't know. I just knew I wanted to do my music for a living. And so I just always had that as my focus, whenever I would do things, every job I had, whatever, I always had it in mind that I'm gonna let this fund, my dream. It was never like I'm gonna stay here and retire after 30 years. I never thought like that. I might be at a job 6 months. I might be there a year. I might be there 3 months. I was never thinking long term except for my music.
It's interesting because what you're talking about is like Ricky Skaggs said one time that he had a job that he hated. He just got married. He was taking a job, I think, at some like a water treatment facility or something like that. And he had to be in the boiler room. He was taking his guitar, and he said one time it flooded, and he said, "I was not functioning in my anointing." And you and I understand exactly what Ricky was saying about that. So let's talk about that. I'm assuming after high school, did you just go to work right away? Or did you go to college, or kind of what was the work path that you were doing when you're not playing gospel tunes at church on Sundays?
The first, like, I guess what you would call a real job that I had, it was at a farm and ranch supply store, McDougal's farm and ranch supply, and it was close to my house. I can walk across the highway to go to work, and I was still in school, like from kindergarten to, matter of fact, that was another thing. I never even thought about that till now. But from kindergarten all the way to my sophomore year, I was in public school, but my parents took me out of public school, and I was a homeschooler for the rest of the time throughout my high school years. My dad was an educator. He was a math and science teacher at one of the school districts around home. Sweeney, it was Sweeney School District, Sweeney ISD near Brazoria. He was a teacher, a junior high math and science teacher, and then my mom, she worked out at Phillips Petroleum down in Old Ocean, Texas, close to Sweeney and Brazoria, all of that. And so they had met in college, and so once they came back and started, working and establishing a family, I went and started, I was small, of course, but like it was like whenever I started doing the job thing, I grew up and then I started doing the job thing. I think I was 15 when I was working at the feed store. From 15 to 17, I worked there. Matter of fact, I worked there like 3 years. my sophomore, junior, and senior year. I worked there at the feed store, and I'm a country boy myself. I grew up because we even at that time I had horses and cows and chickens and dogs and pigs. My grandparents, we were like close. We all lived close within proximity to each other. I lived close to my grandparents and stuff. And my grandfather, he had, a barn and stuff, and we kept the horses and everything. And so I grew up in that. Working at the feed store wasn't really all that, out of the ordinary where we were living. And so it gave me a discount, with feed and hay and all of that. And so
all of which you need on a farm, right?
yeah. And so I worked there. I didn't even know, you just do things in life and you look back and realize, that you learn skills and different things that you're applying today, like sales and marketing, advertising, public relations, customer service. That's my main background now. That's where I got the beginning of that from, at the feed store. And so after that, I started working construction. Then I worked at McDonald's, and I mean, I worked so many different types of jobs. I did hydrant blasting, I did scaffold building.
Wow.
I washed windows and cleaned toilets and mopped floors and painted houses. I mean, I can just name.
You have a wide skill set.
Yeah, yeah. Right before I went to Bible college, I was working for a landscape company, and I started developing a lot of like office skills and stuff because I was assistant office manager there. And so right before that, it's like I just started feeling this real strong burden, or desire for Bible college. And I went to Bible college, and I was making a lot of, I was starting to make a lot of choices, that the young adults make that weren't really beneficial for my life. And so I was one of those typical PKs. They say the PKs are the worst. And so I went to Texas Bible Institute, and I graduated from there in '95. And then from then on, it's like I got married at the time and stuff, and I had started just doing what I had to do, to take care of my family. And I was working at the plants and stuff, shipping and receiving, working on the docks or whatever I had to do, working in the lab or just whatever. Because around our areas, Dow Chemical and BASF and Shintech, all those plants and stuff. And so I was working in the plants a lot then too, but I kept on pursuing my dream, with the music.
At what point did you decide, you know what, I've had every job almost known to man. At what point did you say, you know what, I want to go out as a solo performer, but I'm probably going to need to play days other than Sunday. Maybe I could make a living with this. How did all that come about?
It's like I took a leap of faith in 2002 when I started doing it for a living. I had within a span of like 99, I went through a divorce and stuff. Like 99, 2000, I was going through a divorce and stuff. And so around 2002, I got remarried and I moved to Houston. I was actually living in Houston a while. So I was remarried and stuff and living in Houston. And so it's like, okay, well, I mean, it's like now or never. I'm in the big city, I've never been in, living in the big city before. And so that's when I started, doing a lot of calling, just cold calling hotels and restaurants and just letting them know, that what I did and and seeing if they had like live entertainment there. And if they didn't, basically trying to convince them that they needed it if they didn't have it. And I started doing that, playing in the hotel lobbies, in the restaurants, in the bars, doing happy hour. I started doing that first, and it just kind of, different opportunities started coming along, and I went to. Have you heard of the AD players, Jeanette Cliff George, and all of them? They're in Houston, and they're like an old theater. They do lots of plays and skits and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
But back then, they were real popular, and they had a fundraiser like in the River Oaks area, and in River Oaks.
Yep, and right where that is.
Yeah,
That's a
everybody
very,
knows.
very moneyed area. If you're going to play in Houston and you can play in River Oaks, please do so.
Yeah, and see, and I was all new to this, and that's why I say it was all God, because I didn't know, I didn't know River Oaks was like the place, the spot, where all the people with the money were, I volunteered to play for one of their fundraisers, and I just, it was a hit, and they loved it, and then they started getting me play for parties and different things that they were having, and it wasn't just the AD players. It was like, their sponsors and people were there and stuff, and so I started getting some pretty good little gigs. But my first real like major corporate gig I got was from that, because I had met a lady. She was the marketing director for Saks Fifth Avenue in the Galleria in Houston.
Nice. Nice.
And she said, she was like, "Oh man, I love you. I love your music." And I gave her one of my cards and stuff, and I never like came across as I'm a beginner. I always was like, "Hey, I'm a professional. I've been doing, that's how I carry myself." She said, "Well, I'm gonna give you a call. We're having a VIP event for our customers and stuff." And so, I was like, "Okay," and, not knowing whether she was gonna call or not, And she called, and I was in the Christmas season of 2002, and she was like, "How much do you charge per hour?" And I was like, "Well, I was like just happy, and I was like, well, normally, I charge like $100 an hour," and I was just, she did that, I was happy, and she said, "Okay, well, we can do that. How long can you play?" I said, "Well, however long you want me to," and it was like an all-day event, and so she paid me $100 an hour for 8 hours.
Man.
And so
wow, that's incredible.
Once I got that taste, I was like, "Whoa," and it just started taking off, from there.
Fantastic. We're going to pause here. This is the end of the episode 1 with my friend Edmond Baker, Gigmasters and the Bash's #1 sax player of the U.S. You've been listening to the Band of One podcast. I'm Riley Wilson. If you have ideas for upcoming podcasts, please reach out to me on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Band of One podcast, or you are also welcome to email me, Riley@guitarmadesimpler.com. See you next time. Thanks for listening.